Okay, good morning, everyone. My name's Peter Horrocks. I'm the chair of Semlep, the South East Midlands Local Enterprise Partnership, and I'd like to give you a hearty welcome to this celebratory event. We're looking back over the 10-year history of Semlep, and we're also looking ahead to think about the development of our economy and society for the next 10 years. Thank you so much to everyone for joining. As you know, we were going to be meeting in person, which we were all hugely looking forward to. But obviously, with the recent developments with the new variant, we thought that a number of people might be more cautious about attending an in-person event, and we thought it was more important to bring everyone together, if only virtually, and continuing to work virtually, in order that as many people as possible can take part in the conversation today. So thank you very much for joining us, and I'm sure we all look forward to when we really can all safely get together in person. Let me just run you through the shape of this morning's event. We're going to start in a few minutes with a presentation from my colleague Hilary Chipping, who you'll know, of course, as our chief executive, and who's been with Semlep throughout its history, and many of the achievements that she'll be talking about. I know she'll be too modest to relate at all to her contribution, but much of what she's going to be talking about are things that she's played an enormous part in. And then I'll look ahead and focus particularly on the role that Semlep has increasingly been playing in developing the idea of the green arc and the importance of a environmentally sustainable economy. And then we'll pause for a few questions and answers, and I'll explain how that's going to work when we get to that point. And then after a few questions and answers, we'll move into what I hope is the main meat of our session this morning, which are three presentations from colleagues in the area who are involved in those challenges of environmental sustainability, both businesses and third sector organisations who are collaborating in order to be able to create that sustainable future. Ian Horton, Richard Foster-Fletcher, and Jane Hamilton, and we'll introduce them more specifically when we get to their sessions. And then plenty of opportunity for question and answer to them, and indeed, again, if you've got more broader questions to Hilary or myself, both about Semlep, the Oxford-Cambridge arc, and a variety of things that might be on people's minds at this moment. So that's the shape of the next hour and a half or so, and I'll now hand over to Hilary for her initial presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter, and thank you all for joining us virtually today. As Peter said, we really hoped that this was going to be an opportunity for meeting face to face, but we took the decision earlier this week that everybody, we hope, will feel more comfortable meeting in this virtual way. But I do hope that we will have an opportunity in the new year to meet with all of you, and this, as Peter said, today we're doing a little bit of reflecting on the last 10 years, but more importantly, looking forwards to the future. So, Leanne, next slide, please. Okay, so this is where we should have been this morning, at this fantastic Milton College's Food and Drink Innovation Centre, and I'm really pleased that this is one of the projects that Semlep was able to fund through our local growth fund, and indeed food and drink is a key sector for Northamptonshire and for our whole area. So food and drink innovation, you know, what more could one want? And I do hope that we will be able to welcome you all to this facility at some stage. It's opened in March 2019, £3.5 million from Local Growth Fund to support its construction, and it's used by students on the college's further education food production courses, so food science and technology, food operations, health and nutrition. And just in case anybody's worried that they might have prepared a lot of food for today's event, we have asked that anything that had already been bought and is, if possible, could go to a local food bank, and Semlep will be supporting that. So thanks very much, Leanne. Next slide, please. So this was one of the events that Semlep held at this time of year. In fact, this is December the 3rd, 2015. Seems a long time ago now. But we've always tried to do an event at this time of year, usually linked to our AGM, but an opportunity to get our partners and stakeholders together to hear some interesting presentations and really just enable that networking opportunity. So as I say, hopefully we'll be able to do something similar in next year. But this year is the 10th year of Semlep, so it's appropriate that that we're celebrating that year. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do now is to run through the years, just drawing out some of the key highlights as Semlep progressed. Some of you in the room will have been with us right from the beginning. I realise for others you may only have joined Semlep relatively recently, but it's great that you're here today. So right at the beginning, local enterprise partnerships were established in 2010-11 with the coalition government at the time, the decision by government to dispense with regional development agencies and to set up these new local enterprise partnerships. There were not many rules from government at the time. We were just told that local authority areas that wanted to work together, that formed functional economic geographies, could establish a board, which would be private sector led board, and focus on delivering sustainable economic growth. And that is what we have endeavoured to do over the last 10 years, and hopefully we'll continue to do so. So Anne Lim was appointed as the chair, and then drew together a board, and I supported Anne from the beginning in terms of developing Semlep. There were not many other people around then, but we did have one person who is still with us today, and that's Gail, who was Gail Pope then, but is now Gail Parker. And we had an incredibly busy first few months as a new local enterprise partnership. We went round to every part of the Semlep area. We had a sort of roadshow presentation. What was the LEP about? What did people want us to do? And that culminated actually in a big conference at the MK Dons Stadium, where we had over 300 people, and that was really the start of Semlep. We launched our website at that time, and one of the first instances where government funded local enterprise partnerships is through enterprise zones, and you can see our Northampton Waterside Enterprise Zone, which has been an incredibly successful enterprise zone. That was established very early on, and early in 2012 the government gave us £18 million to fund through loan investment in enabling infrastructure in the area. Next slide, please, Leanne. So the next 2 years, we continued to develop. Fortunately, acquired some more staff, a little bit of more funding from government, published our first business plan, and then government decided to fund what they started off calling the Local Growth Deal, but more recently we know as the Local Growth Fund. Daniel Mowat, who's you'll see there on the left of the lower picture, many of you will know Daniel. He was appointed as the Chief Executive in 2013 and really energised the organisation, drove things forward, and particularly established our first growth hub, which was called Velocity, and we submitted our strategic economic plan to government. Next slide, please. And then 2015 was a great year. Starting off in January, we had a minister, Greg Clark, come to, this is at Milton Keynes in what was the Transport Systems Catapult, and everybody gathered there, our board members, our local authority colleagues, businesses and others, and Greg Clark officially signed after the first phase of funding for the Local Growth Fund, which was £79.3 million. And that was a great start to the year. And then later in the year, we had another big event around skills, and that was at the Sculpture Gallery at Woburn Abbey. And we asked for people businesses to pledge to support our skills strategy going forwards. Next slide, please, Leanne. And then 2016, again, another new chief executive. This was Stephen Cashpolt. The main focus of 2016 and the early part of 2017 was very much around this merger with Northamptonshire Enterprise Partnership. As some of you will recall, when Semlep was first established, the functional economic area spread across to Cherwell and down to Aylesbury Vale in Buckinghamshire, but we also had an overlap with Northamptonshire Enterprise Partnership, and 5 of the districts in what was then Northamptonshire County were both part of Semlep and part of Northamptonshire Enterprise Partnership. And we made that work really well, but I think it's fair to say that the merger really helped to ensure that we were operating effectively, and most importantly that businesses had a clear idea of the geography of the LEP and the role of the LEP. So moving on to the next slide, please, Leanne. Okay, so 2017 and another tranche of local growth fund money, £59 million this time to be invested in the Semlep area, and we again had launched another plan in November of 2017, our next strategic economic plan, with an ambition to double the size of the economy of the South East Midlands. Next slide, please. So 2018, the Velocity project, which was what we called previously our Growth Hub, came to an end, and that had supported over 1,200 businesses, and we had workshops that were attended by 716 businesses with 1,384 attendees, I'm told, and we awarded £700,000 worth of grants. So a great project brought to an end, but only so that we could then initiate our new Growth Hub, which I'll say more about in a moment. It was a very exciting year for me because I was appointed as the chief executive of Semlep, and as Peter said, I've been around since the beginning, and I was incredibly pleased and proud to be appointed as chief executive in May 2018. Next slide, please, Leanne. But 2019 was a really a key year for Semlep, and so we started off with I've talked a bit about Velocity. We merged with the Northamptonshire Growth Hub and formed the Semlep Growth Hub, which is the growth hub that you will hopefully all be familiar with today, managed very ably by one of my team, Vicky Klamuka. And then on the 27th of February, Peter joined us as our chair, and clearly he knew it was going to be an absolutely bumper year for Semlep. Immediately after he joined, Peter led the launch of the energy strategy. In March, we were judged to be the only LEP in the country that was exceptional in delivery, governance and strategy. And indeed, that was a very, very proud moment for the whole team, fantastic team and board and all our local authority supporters and businesses. We launched a community grants programme, which has been incredibly popular, and I think even more so during the time of the pandemic. I think it was so important to have those grants that were used to support bringing people back into the workplace and working with a number of voluntary organisations. So that was really good. We also launched our Careers Hub in Luton, which has been really, really successful and absolutely critical to ensure that skills are developed within Luton, and that the workforce really is focused on an inclusive strategy towards skills that enables people to find good quality jobs in Luton. So that's been a great success. And then Also in July, we launched our local industrial strategy, and thanks very much to Claire and Arthur in particular, our economic analysts, because I think that was that was, and it still is, a great evidence base, and really summarises the opportunities of this area. And as you will know, this was the sort of one of the starts of working across the Oxford to Cambridge arc geography. So on the day that we launched our local industrial strategy, we assembled at Cranfield University to do a joint launch with the Oxfordshire local industrial strategy, the Cambridge and Peterborough Combined Authority local industrial strategy, and the Buckinghamshire local industrial strategy. So this was the start of working across the arc. And then in December, we had another of these types of events on the same day as our AGM, and that was at Milton Keynes Gallery, which was a project that we'd invested in with Local Growth Fund. Again, a really great example of the importance of culture and creativity to this area, and that's one of our key sectors. So a great opportunity to show off that extension to the gallery with the help of funding through the Local Growth Fund. And we had a very interesting discussion then, really the sort of very much the start of us looking at this whole green agenda, which we're going to be developing with our speakers later this morning. Next slide, please, Leanne. So after that fantastic year, we move into 2020, and then, as with everybody, coronavirus hit. We had to close up the office in March, move to working from home, and again, the whole team worked together fantastically. I cannot say, how proud I was of everything from IT support to HR support, team leaders providing that additional support for their teams as everybody went through a really difficult year. A number of my senior team are women, and they have young children, and they were juggling homeschooling, supporting businesses through the Growth Hub, and at the same time as working, giving more than 100% of their commitments to Semlep. So really proud of the team. And throughout the year, government was providing really important support for businesses, and a lot of that support and those grants came through the LEP, came through the local authorities, and we all worked together. I mean, I think the one thing that I would say about 2020 and having so many of our meetings virtually is that we managed to increase the numbers of people that we were engaging with, and our business engagement group, where we talked to particularly the business representative organisations across Semlep. We were meeting, I think, every couple of weeks at one point, certainly every month, having a fantastic exchange of information. We were talking to our local authority colleagues, and I really feel that brought the whole Semlep partnership, the public-private partnership, together in the most effective way. And developing the economic recovery strategy, again, that was very much a joint effort with our analysts, our Growth Hub team, our skills team, fantastic team led by Paul Thompson, who've continued to work virtually with schools throughout the pandemic and provide that vital labour market information to enable young people to acquire the skills that they need in order to move into the workforce locally. So again, a really great team effort from Semlep. Moving on, please, Leanne. So this is bringing it all together. 10 years, a decade of difference, and indeed, as I say, that last year, and indeed most of this year as well, working from home, carrying out virtual meetings, but still continuing to deliver. So what have we, this year I particularly wanted to mention the fantastic work of the Local Growth Fund programmes team, again led by Judith. We had an independent evaluation of our Local Growth Fund programme, which gave a glowing report for the way in which that has been delivered in partnership with our project managers, who are public sector and private sector, delivering those projects. We've that £265 million worth of Local Growth Fund. With that, by 2030, we will have delivered 40,000 new homes, 22,000 new jobs, and 15,000 learners. And there are really some amazing projects, some of which you can see pictured here. Catesby Tunnel, wind tunnel, you can see in the foreground there. I also just wanted to mention the picture that you can see where we're all grouped in the lobby at the House of Commons, and again that was I think that was a fantastic experience when we took our Make the Connection brochure down to Westminster with our partners and our MPs. Again, that was a great day for Semlep. So we've been continuing to deliver throughout the pandemic, and I'm absolutely immensely proud of the team who have shown their hard work, their passion and their commitment to deliver and to make a difference throughout some really challenging times. So moving on now to the next slide, please. A decade of change. So hopefully you've all just had a taste of the progression that we've made through the last 10 years, and what we have been able to deliver through working in partnership. As you will know, we're all in a very uncertain time at the moment. We're hoping that government will publish a levelling up white paper, and that we'll have some clarity around the future, both for local enterprise partnerships and for the Oxford to Cambridge ARC. But I strongly believe that whatever comes out of those documents, that collaboration across a broader geographic area, partnership between the public and the private sector, and that focus on innovation and on skills will be absolutely vital to ensure that we continue to deliver the true potential for this area. And I just wanted, before I hand over to Peter, I just wanted to tell you of one finding from our recent business survey. Our business survey showed that the majority of businesses either saw net zero as not a concern for their business or had no net zero plans for business. I think we all need to work with our businesses to help them understand their carbon footprint and to implement the changes that they will need to do to reach net zero. So there's a lot more work to be done going forwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilary. That was fascinating seeing those 10 years, and congratulations to you and the team. But I also want to particularly thank all of our partners, because Semlep's a relatively small organisation. Its job is to kind of convene people and bring them together, and nothing that we do can be achieved without our private sector partners, our education partners, who you referred to a number of times during the course of that, and of course our local authority colleagues, and many of those people are on the call today. I'm going to give a brief introduction to the themes around environmental sustainability, but then we'll pause for questions. And let me just point out the way we'd like you to put questions forward. If you've got a question that you would like specifically to ask, either in text or to voice it, please put them in the Q&A, the bottom right-hand function. If you've got just a general comment that you want others to see, put that in the chat. The chat is seen by everyone. The Q&A comes to the panelists. And later on, when we've got some quite specific presentations, if there are particular things that you want a panelist to answer, or maybe to exchange contact details or something like that, then do use it in that way. And depending on the number of people who ask questions through the Q&A, we'll either just read them out, or we'll ask people to voice those questions. let me just get up my presentation if I can. Sorry, it's not allowing me to share. Leanne, do you have the presentation?
Yes, just 1 second, Peter, and I'll share it.
Thank you. Sorry about this. So yeah, so as a prompt to looking ahead, we're going to focus on environmental sustainability. Of course, as Hilary's indicated, there's a vast range of activities that we're thinking about, and we have been publishing documents about in relation to our future industrial strategy and innovation. So we could have chosen any number of themes, but we did 2 years ago, as Hilary indicated, have our equivalent event to this, and we focused on environmental sustainability, and in particular, the concept of the green arc. And I think that was the first time that any public event had happened, which was talking about the Oxford-Cambridge arc through the prism of its environmental potential. And of course, there's been a lot of contention around the arc, particularly to do with road building schemes, and the main expressway scheme is now not happening, but also the target of 1 million homes. And that's been in many ways the primary way in which people across the Oxford-Cambridge area have understood it. But we believe that both for the kind of moral reason that Hilary talked about, i.e. the importance of net zero in particular, but also broader approaches to environmental sustainability, but also because of the business opportunities that move towards an environmentally based economy creates, that there was a real opportunity, and that was therefore appropriate for a public-private partnership to be focusing on that as a particularly distinctive characteristic for our area. And I hope that people would agree that that was reasonably prescient or ahead of its time. And in the 2 years since, we've seen a greater upsurge in environmental awareness throughout the world. Obviously, activism, Greta Thunberg, and young people being involved. Some aspects of it that are more controversial in terms of protest and direct action. But of course, most recently in our own country, COP26 and the world coming together. And I think it's fair to say that our area, both the South East Midlands, that's Northamptonshire, Bedfordshire and Milton Keynes, and our colleagues on either side of us in the Oxford-Cambridge arc, have a genuine claim to global leadership in relation to this. And indeed, when the government published its outline prospectus and its launch of its spatial framework consultation earlier this year, it talked about world-leading characteristics of the Oxford-Cambridge arc in 2 ways, both productivity, high innovation leading to productivity, and also in terms of environmental sustainability. So I think we've got a moment in time where those things can come together, and where our area can really both benefit from economically, but also, probably more importantly, make a great contribution both to this country and to the world. And if we can move on to the next slide, I'll just touch on some of the things that we've been doing. So you'll see in front of you a number of documents. Some of them Hilary's already alluded to. Our energy strategy. There's been a lot of investment and support for more sustainable energy solutions in the area. The local industrial strategy, at the bottom right, the shared principles for protecting, restoring and enhancing the environment in the Oxford-Cambridge arc. And Semlep's been making a strong contribution to that with partners, Natural England, RSPB, many of the nature groups across the area. And those principles have been adopted by many of the local authorities across the Oxford-Cambridge arc area. So there's a whole range of ways in which we've been contributing through thought leadership and to the practical introduction of environmentally positive policies across the arc. And then there are specific projects that we've funded, and I'll take them in the order that they appear within this slide. So the powertrain facility that you see, powertrains are the propulsion systems for vehicles, and this is a new testing facility at Marla, which is particularly focused on being able to do things sustainably. That's in Northampton. Bedford Green Energy Park, a facility which will enable innovation in energy to be done holistically with low carbon solutions, generating green energy from wind and solar. We've also been involved in a similar facility at Chalveston in Northamptonshire. The bottom left, the Modern Methods of Construction, is a new facility at Bedford College. And you may be aware that modern methods of construction are particularly both environmentally sustainable in their own right in terms of low impact, but also contributing to the built environment and enabling that to be in itself more sustainable. Smart commuting to help local transport solutions. We've worked with Milton Keynes Council and the 5G innovation there. This particular picture is of a smart commuting solution that's being introduced in Northampton. And the last example towards the bottom right, Houghton Brook, is a flood alleviation scheme in Luton, or actually in central Bedfordshire, but in the Luton, close to Luton, which is about dealing with the issues that have been created. This is part of the mitigation in relation to environmental sustainability with increased flood levels. So both policy and action, I think that's the key message from that slide. If we can move on. So what are we thinking about now? Well, I think this is where the convening, and you see a number of the gatherings and what we're talking about today, working with universities. The universities across the Arc are much better networked together. A number of the priorities that were set for the Oxford-Cambridge Arc's economic prospectus included aspects of environmental sustainability. So particularly around transportation, and you can see the electric powered plane at Cranfield there. You can see the pods at Milton Keynes and the development of AI technology at Millbrook testing ground. I don't think we're actually currently thinking of hang gliding as being a particularly practical sustainable solutions unless you're on the top of Dunstable Downs, but that's a little bit of transport solution there. So those are things where we're focusing our efforts on business and universities working closely together, and the intellectual leadership provided particularly by Cranfield University in our area has been really exceptional, and they're currently working on producing an analysis of the environmental assets. That's both, the nature, the number of square meters and acres of nature positive parts of the countryside, but also the businesses and the research and innovation capability across the area, and that paints a very coherent picture. But all of that is things that are happening in the Semlep area and things that are happening in the Oxford-Cambridge Arc. But what can we do by organising ourselves more effectively, both to create policies in the way that the environmental principles have been, but are there more things that we can do by combining activity across a wider geography and sharing capabilities, creating innovation, working with sustainable finance options to be able to drive this, to be able to drive this innovation. Those are all things that we're thinking about. So just move on to the last slide, if you could, Leanne. We're going to, in a few minutes, hear from our three colleagues who I'll introduce at that moment. But what I'd like to do is to pause now and to give everyone the opportunity to ask questions of Hilary in terms of the retrospective, but also people's suggestions for the way that we should be taking this agenda forward. So most of the comments I'm seeing in the chat are very welcome and appreciated compliments to Hilary and the team for what they've achieved. But Catherine, I mean, you've referred to your own company and the way that you're supporting. Maybe just Catherine Wright, if you'd like to come on and just make a contribution to how you see the role of the LEP and what more we potentially can do in working with companies like yours in relation to this sustainability agenda.
Hello, Peter. Thank you for giving me the the forum for this. It's wonderful. I'm actually a COVID victim at the moment, so I've turned my video off out of choice. Yeah, it was quite fortuitous that it is actually virtual. So we're an independent company, but we work with the Northampton Sustainability Forum with Charlotte there at the university, and we've worked with the university and the hospitals as well. But from our side of things, we work to help companies to reach their sustainability targets. But what we're seeing a lot of it at the moment is people providing solutions that aren't actually that sustainable. So we're actually guiding them through a bit of a minefield of new products that are being launched that don't always have the right sort of outlet in terms of waste management solutions. So it's really to try and be passionate about doing the right thing. From a small coffee shop to a university, there are ways we can help to support, and we can scale it up as well. So the smaller initiatives are great, sort of coffee cup recycling and compostable cups and that sort of thing. But on a much larger scale, we can actually offer sort of like the post-collection segregation, so it goes through our recycling facilities, etc. But I think just from being part of the Sustainability Forum for over the last 12 months, we're starting to see a little bit of a trend now of new products reaching the market that aren't as sustainable as they may well appear. So I guess it's just for us to be in those arenas to help guide people along. And it's very much, we are all passionate about doing the right thing at Corley's. We know if we are presented with a waste that everyone is broadcasting that they could do things with, and we get it at our facilities, and we end up having to send it for energy recovery, it's quite disheartening. So I mean, it's just about for us guiding people really, and being here and being present and on hand.
Thank you, Catherine. That prompts a number of interesting thoughts, which we might come back to after we've heard the presentations. I mean, it's interesting you refer to the Sustainability Forum, and I think there's a really interesting thing about how far the way that we work with businesses with a particular interest in sustainability is about the sustainability sector, and how far it's about kind of knowledge transfer and influencing other sectors. So whether it's our, the SMEs and the growth curve, the growth hub, or whether it's energy businesses or transport. And I think just referring back to the statistic that Hilary referred to from our recent business survey, it is striking how low a proportion of businesses have got sustainability and net zero on their agenda. Now, obviously not every business is going to see business opportunities in that, but even if it's just about preparing for, potential requirements in terms of, heating or environmental standards or whatever it might be. So I think maybe we should come back to this, what is the way that Semlep can engineer a conversation between those businesses and those organizations, public organizations as well, that are most focused on sustainability, and the vast mass of businesses which at the moment aren't really taking it seriously. Maybe that's a thought that we can kind of come back to later. I'm not seeing any other specific questions as opposed to comments. Sorry, Ian, you've turned your camera on. Did you want to kind of come in at this point?
No, I'm just preparing up, ready to present in a few seconds.
Yeah, okay, great. Sorry, so you're first, of course. Sorry, I do apologise. Yeah, no, you're first the presentations. Yeah. So let's go into the first of the three presentations, which is with Ian, who will introduce us to his business and describe the way that they're supporting sustainability in the area. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Now, hopefully this is going to screen share. Can you confirm that screen sharing for me?
I'm not seeing it yet, Ian, I'm afraid.
That's all right. It may be. Hang on, that's it.
Yeah, it's coming up now.
There we go. Excellent. Righty-ho.
Got it. Well done.
Excellent. Work out why. There we go. Excellent. Yeah, so I'm Ian Horton from Gander's Goat. We're considered a micro business. We are a farm-based business. We're a goat dairy in actual fact, and we are right up at the top end of Northamptonshire bordering the bottom fields with Leicestershire. So right up in the very top of the county and at the top of sort of Semlep's area of operations. Now, that's Ganders Farm as you see it. We purchased the farm back in 2013, originally just as a sort of hobby farm, small holding, which then followed on to become a business in late 2015 with the introduction of goats to the farm business. We produce two sort of main products. Although we're a farm, I would also call us producers as our primary business. So we produce two main products. One is our soap products using goat's milk, and the other one is ice cream. Also, on top of that, we do sell things like the milk and the meat directly. Now, our sustainability journey, which is what I've been asked to talk about, started from the very first products. When we first started producing the soap, we knew that sustainability had to be at the heart of our business, and it always has been. We specifically made steps to make sure that our soaps were palm oil free, as we knew that led to deforestation and that side of things. And we knew that every bit of our packaging, as far as possible, needed to be within a recyclable content that was easy to sort of home recycle. And that in itself was quite easy with the soap. However, when it came to our ice cream products, that's where far more issues started to come about. When we first started doing the ice cream, early 2016, much of the sort of standardized packaging available to small producers on the market had plastic lids, foil combined with cardboard, and plastic liners. And we worked particularly hard through the early couple of years of the business to try and work with different people to try and develop a packaging option that basically removed the plastic from there and was easily home recyclable, easy to compost if need to be at home. And 2018, we started working with 5 individual companies, each producing a segment of our packaging to become the first ice cream producers in the UK to actually create a compostable product across their entire range of ice cream packaging. We had to work with 5 different companies because no single company could do the whole process at that stage. What's quite nice, though, is to see that we seem to have led the way in that if you look at many small ice cream producers now, they're using the same packaging that we developed with those companies in the very early stages. So it's lovely to actually see that sort of knock-on effect, although their products, unfortunately, look fairly similar to ours, actually filtering through. We've already had, for example, sustainable coffee cups mentioned, but this was sort of right back at the early stages of that when that was first coming on board. So having reduced the plastic in our packaging, we were able to call ourselves plastic free. We have been sustainable from the start, but the one thing that we do have with being a farming business, and it's particularly a livestock farming business, is the ever issue of methane production. COP26, day 2 of COP26, they negotiated reducing methane productions by 30%. Unfortunately for us, livestock, especially ruminants like sheep and cows, but also goats, do unfortunately sort of emit significant levels of methane, which is 30 times worse than CO2 as far as a greenhouse gas goes. Now, that's one sort of side issue. This was Ganders Farm when we first bought it. It had been largely disused for a couple of years, and it largely sort of gone through the process of starting to rewild itself. Now, because we were wanting it to be a business, we went down the standard farming practice routes. We were looking at extensive grazing of livestock. And what became very prevalent over the course of the next 2 or 3 years is that the work that the nature had done in rewilding this with extensive grazing was largely being undone. We noticed significant levels in reduction of the biodiversity that returned to the farm, particularly in pollinating insects and grass species. And that's where we started to look at alternative options to the extensive grazing method and whether there was a option of actually locking up some of this methane production. Now, methane naturally sort of breaks down in the atmosphere over the course of about 10 years, and then will break down into the soil. But can we offset that in some way by maybe locking away significant levels of carbon? And that's where we moved into our strip grazing method. Strip grazing methods, regenerative agriculture, as it's now being more commonly known as, is becoming very prevalent in the farming media now as a significant way forward. The way it basically works in layman's terms is each goat stock stays in a very small area of the field for a very short period of time, normally a much higher stocking density to what you would have on an extensive grazing method. So this field that we see here, they started on the right-hand side of the field. They were in there for around about a week, and then that strip moves across that field. This does a couple of things really in doing this. The first thing is that they don't graze off all the grass. So they're only grazing sort of top 30%. Because they're at quite high stocking densities, 30% of that grass is then trampled down and made higher contact with the soil. And then the sort of last 30% is able to recover very, very quickly. And this is where the exception comes to a sort of extensive overgrazing method, where you don't get this very quick recovery growth afterwards. Most of our fields have recovered to sort of non-grazing level within around about 3 to 4 weeks after they've finished grazing on it. And the contact time that undergrowth that's been trampled down onto the soil, that starts a whole process of basically a business-to-business exchange that's happening constantly in our natural environment. The plants, the surface of the plants, the green areas, they're photosynthesizing, capturing that carbon. Now, as a plant has a couple of options that it can do. One is that it can take that carbon and use it to grow. The other thing it can use is it can use it a bit like a cash transaction. And this is where the clever science happens, because it takes that and trades it with the microorganisms that live in the soil. And those microorganisms accept that carbon quite freely, and they transfer it or exchange it for nutrients that come from the minerals in the soil around them. And this whole process works very, very well until you start adding in things like agrochemicals and that side of things. And those agrochemicals will start to reduce the need for these carbon transactions to go on. Now, this is all quite important as far as our business goes, because this has meant that that area of land that you saw at the beginning, which is only around about sort of 8 or so acres, around about sort of 3.5 to 4 hectares of land, has been able in just 12 months to significantly lock away a very large portion of carbon. In fact, around about 5 times our annual emissions of carbon dioxide. So that has in itself allowed us to call ourselves carbon neutral. So we're offsetting not just our carbon production, but also our methane production by securing it within our land. And it should be able to do this for a number of years to come. So that's the basic sort of solution. The advantages that has as well for our business, we've got significantly reduced inputs, but a much, much higher yield. There's a photo of my son actually down in hay fields this year, with the grass standing significantly taller above his head than it ever has done. Previously, bearing in mind he's growing each year, that was only sort of reaching his shoulder height. And this is the advantage, is this carbon exchange also means that there's more nutrients available to the grasses, there's higher water availability in there, and the water, any light downpour actually permeates the ground, so reduces flooding risk as well further down the stream. This has also led to significantly increased levels of biodiversity. In the course of the last few years, we've gone from when we were on an extensive system to a handful of grass species, sort of 3 or 4. 2 years ago, we recorded 10 grass species. We're now recording well over 25 individual grass species that have naturally been able to come through with this grazing method. The other thing it has allowed is sort of organic biocontrol. We're not inputting any chemicals, so anything, any weeds or anything like that that are coming through that cause a potential upset to this, we've discovered that actually often by doing a more hands-off approach, things will tend to take over and take control on and take a natural control method to themselves. So, for example, that little beetle at the bottom there called an emerald dock beetle never existed on the farm sort of 3 or 4 years ago when we were using sort of chemical sprays on to control weeds. That little beetle appeared when there were significant levels of dock one year, and to the point where I was actually contemplating about having to resort back to sprays. Didn't. We left it about 4 weeks, and then all of a sudden the docks started keeling over and dying. And when you looked a little bit closer, they were all being eaten away from underneath the leaves. And since that point, we've never had a problem because that natural control methods have dropped back into balance. And that's the key thing for us now, is maintaining this balance, maintaining the ability to lock up this carbon and increase our soil carbon contents. So that's one part of the business, which has been fantastic and allowed us significant improvements in outputs with reduced inputs. However, like any business that's in production, energy efficiency and energy production and energy dependence is always sat at the back of anybody's mind. For us, it was probably one of our most significant outgrowings. Operating freezers, cooling capabilities always is very energy hungry. And this year we've inputted phase 1 of our off-grid move, which was a reasonably significant for us solar installation on a series of roofs, with the plan to increase that along with some other technologies, including natural methane gas collecting from the livestock, and as well as hopefully potentially wind in the near future. And with all of these, we hope to hit to an off-grid solution as near as possible. We're always going to have to maintain a grid link because we do have significant peaks that can't be met with renewables without relying on the grid itself. However, the other thing that we have installed alongside these sort of renewable and green technologies includes our own on-site battery storage capacity. That means that for the portion of the day that we're not actually being able to generate, whether that be through solar or wind or anything else, it's going to be able to operate on those batteries. This time of year, we're operating for around about 70% of the day physically off-grid and not actually importing any significant energy from the grid as goes. But the other thing this has allowed us to do is work with the national grid and a very convenient little app that they've launched recently called When to Plug In, which actually monitors when the greenest energy is available to us. And if we find that the solar and other green technologies are not generating enough that particular day to meet our energy demand, we can choose the greenest options time when there's a surplus sort of green technology elsewhere in the country, to actually import some power to charge those batteries up, to then use that battery stored energy later on when there isn't the availability of those renewables coming through via grid. This has all led significantly to steps which saw us being invited up to COP26 to discuss these exact terms and what we're doing to it. COP26 has already been discussed. There is, in fact, a COP just about every year, 2020 being the only year that there wasn't one in recent years. And what can I say about COP26? There were queues, significant queues, 40,000 people trying to attend on the first 2 days did mean sort of an hour and a half queue to get in. Not so many protests as I sort of thought there might be. But a significant number of countries in attendance. There were 192 countries, I believe it was, in attendance there. The UK had 238 delegates in attendance. We weren't the biggest. Brazil had the biggest attendance at COP26. And the significant sort of phrase that's been bandied about, and it's been already mentioned 3 or 4 times during today's talk is net zero. And so we were actually there as heroes of net zero. I was highly commended. There were 10 businesses selected as finalists in 2 categories for our targets and our implementation of those targets to reach net zero. Now, before I move on to actually what net zero actually means, or rather what net zero actually means is, so I said earlier that we're carbon neutral, and this is where carbon neutral and net zero are seeming to get confused significantly. And I'm sorry if I'm teaching anyone to suck eggs at this point. I kind of feel it's worth touching on. So to be carbon neutral, there's several scopes to your carbon footprint, scope 1, 2, and 3. For carbon neutral, we just need to look at scopes 1 and 2, get them measured, and then offset those emissions, and we can then call ourselves carbon neutral. We don't have to reduce them in any way. We don't necessarily have to use the greenest options for those. And so we are carbon neutral as a business, but we are leading to net zero. With net zero, we have to measure both scope 1 and 2 and produce those with 0 carbon emissions. And we then also have to measure scope 3, which is our sort of indirect carbon emissions, which is often for many businesses the most significant portion of their carbon footprint. And those, we have to work directly with those suppliers, those producers of those scope 3 emissions, to try and either work with greener options, and then whatever's left we can then offset. So net zero is significantly harder to reach, and at the minute within agriculture we don't have the technology available there at present to directly meet net zero tomorrow. Tractors, for example, are still running on diesel fuel, although things like HVO or biodiesel options are coming through, which is making them greener, but still not able to be listed as a net zero option. So until we get green tractors, either be that hydrogen, methane, or battery operated, we're still struggling to get to that true net zero. But that is our task and our goal as the business goes, and that's where we're looking at moving forwards. Why it actually all matters, obviously back in the Paris Climate Agreement, the 1.5 degrees was agreed. We're looking at already being at 1.2 degrees warming since that point, so we're rapidly gaining on our Paris Agreement. Where they got to at COP26 is an optimistic scenario, probably 1.8 degrees, but realistically the policies that were laid out, we're looking at about 2.7 degrees global warming. That side of things will hopefully be curbed slightly. I think the one thing that was very obvious at this year's COP was that we are still, unfortunately, within a global pandemic, and that is causing significant issues with negotiations, especially when it comes to funding. And so pretty much every single country that was in attendance has agreed to go away and return at COP27 next year in Egypt to negotiate far harder, and hopefully that will bring those targets down significantly. Those targets that were set this year, agreement to reduce subsidies for coal and gas, reduce methane emissions by 30%, that was agreed very early on. And as I say, one of the significant aspects of that, unfortunately for us as a business, is agriculture. Reduce deforestation. Those that were responsible for about 90% of the world's forests signed up to that agreement for 2030. Global zero emission vehicles by 2040, and $413 million agreed to fund those that are struggling most in economically deprived countries. That is it for my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I will just point anyone that is interested to the SME Climate Hub. It's a particularly useful point where you can sign up to your climate goals, but also offers a good feedback opportunity to get information on local latest grants that are coming through, as well as a range of free tools as well. So.
Ian, that's great. Thank you very much. For time, can I suggest that people who've got specific questions ask them through the chat or through the Q&A function? I can see a number of people are also already interested in talking to you and have learned a lot. And I learned a lot. Fantastic learning opportunity, including about goats and fungi, and absolutely fascinating. So thank you very much. So if I can ask our next two presenters to be reasonably crisp, so we've got time for questions to everyone at the end. Next is Richard Foster Fletcher from MKAI. Richard.
Peter, thank you so much. I'm going to see if I can get my screen up as well. Let's try this. How's that looking? Is that the full screen, or are you seeing my next slide?
I'm just seeing the preliminary thing where it says, here it's come, it's up now. Got it. That's it.
Wonderful. Yeah, I will certainly be as brief as possible, but just a mention of kudos to Ian there. That was just incredible to see that presentation and the work that's been going on and how difficult that stuff is to do. So congratulations, Ian, from me. So let's jump in. We're MKAI. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present for a few minutes today on what we're doing and our exciting plans in the area if they come off. It's good to see some familiar names and faces, plenty of people I know on this call, and thank you for the introductions to Semlep so far. Let's see if I can click. So who are we? We're a team of 6 now, added 5 employees this year, so we're sort of growing fairly quickly. We work with a team of about 25 delivery partners to work on AI projects, particularly those around responsible AI, diverse and inclusive AI, ethical AI. We have 500 community members who also contribute, and a network of just over 8,000 associates around the world. We're actively working with MK College on the Strategic Development Fund, helping SMEs to adopt and catalyze AI projects and data projects. Working with Silverstone Technology Park as their AI in residence. We're working with 6 CEOs to help them to take on emerging technology programs as well. We have proposed programs with MK Council that I'll come to a little bit later on, and also with MKU, who we've also got a working partnership with around events, and we hosted our first hybrid event at MKU just recently, which I think was the first ever event at MKU, so that was quite fun to be their inaugural event. We have 3 practices of work. We have the Centre for Digital Citizenship, and that incorporates the green tech proposal that we have in, as well as the sort of beyond smart cities work that we do. Smart cities largely have failed. It's not the right term anymore, and it's much better to talk about digital placemaking and digital citizenship and digital empowerment due to failures like Toronto and so on, where top-down connected projects just don't work. That's led by Dr. Adelia Coy, my colleague. I run the Centre for Digital Trust, working at the sort of ethical and responsible AI edge, and trying to write a book, we both are, that's due out in August 2023 with Bloomsbury about the economics of digital trust. We also have a Women in AI, or Women in MKAI practice as well, led by my colleague Karen. We do lots of outreach every month. We have very popular forums around inclusive AI. We have innovation workshops, community discussion groups, and SIGs as well, particularly around environment and healthcare and other areas that are so pertinent in data and artificial intelligence. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about green innovation. It's just some mentions, really, some highlights of the exciting things. You know that Semlep and MK Council and Brian Matthews and Sophie Lloyd and Ian Pulford are doing a great job when the majority of my presentation focuses on mobility, which is testament to the 5G work and the great initiatives around MK. So I'll give a mention to some companies that I've been working with in the EV battery production space. I had a tour of Danica's facilities recently over at Silverstone Technology Park. Just incredible. I've actually slightly forgotten what I am allowed to and not allowed to talk about when we had the tour. So I'm going to be a little careful here what I say, but there was some very interesting uses for lithium-ion batteries beyond just vehicles on the roads, if I can say that. Hopefully they won't. That isn't too much. So really, really impressive work that they're doing. You may have seen that Intertech has sent up a set up an EV Centre of Excellence in Milton Keynes as well. My presentation is a little biased towards MK, and I won't apologise for that, but I'd love to hear more about the surrounding area for next time I do these kind of presentations. I can't talk about EVs without mentioning Lunaz, another of our clients on the park, and incredibly, they are taking these kind of vehicles like the Rolls-Royce that you see back to zero. So it's not just about converting an old fossil fuel car or an internal combustion engine to a modern EV vehicle. They actually reset the whole vehicle back to zero with a warranty and so on. So you give the whole vehicle a new lease of life, which is so key. I mean, I have my order in for my EV, but of course it's not that environmentally friendly to get rid of a car that I currently have to replace it with another car before we even talk about supply chains. And so what Lunaz is doing is looking at commercial vehicles like fire trucks and bin trucks and so on, and not have those vehicles go to waste in the future or not get used as effectively, but actually take that existing vehicle that might have a 20-year payback on the carbon to create the vehicle and then putting it back on the road for another 10, 20 years. I also saw that David Beckham has recently invested in Lunaz. Exciting times ahead for them. BP Pulse, a great presence in Milton Keynes as well. I think the interesting stat on that one is that we have more EV charging now per person than any other town or city except London. So a great place to have an EV. Chelmsford was mentioned already, I think, by Peter. They're looking at how they can power 100 trucks with hydrogen. So a massive amount of hydrogen produced by solar. So another incredible initiative, and that one, of course, is in Northampton. Speedy has set up its low carbon innovation centre as well in Milton Keynes. And I couldn't not mention Corley's, who have been mentioned a few times on this session already, and the fantastic work they're doing, supported by Semlep in the recycling space. I really hope that we're going to do more in the area around recycling and circular economy, and particularly EV battery recycling. I think it's the missing link we have so far, and I'd love to be corrected if there are companies coming through that are working on that. So we think we need a green tech network, quite frankly, and I don't think we're alone in this. I've been chatting to quite a few of you already, including colleagues at Semlep, and I think we kind of all agree on this. Let's have a little bit of a few stats here. In 2030, there could be 694,000 direct jobs in the low carbon and renewable energy economy. That's a stat from local gov. So the number now is 185,000. No, my apologies. In 2018, there were 185,000 jobs. So that's rising and rising. They're talking about 1.3 million jobs by 2050. This is an incredibly important area for human life as we know it, of course, but it also adds this incredible new economy that's now worth more than £200 billion. That is 4 times the size of our manufacturing industry. The UK's low carbon economy is 4 times the size of our manufacturing economy. This is huge and very, very vital, of course, as well. I borrowed this slide. I see Ros Bird present this slide, and it's one of the, I always think it looks like cells or bacteria or something, but it's a good way of demonstrating where we are. And so I hope Silverstone won't mind me borrowing this slide. So we have the green tech networks in Cambridge and Oxfordshire already. And we don't have one here in the middle. So it seems like we need to get onto that fairly quickly. Hence why we have put a proposal in to MK Council that's being considered for us to start that and have a 17-month runway to get that to self-sufficiency and sustainability in terms of business sustainability. And folks like Martin Garrett from Cambridge Clean Tech, very much involved in this, very keen to help us to leverage the great work that's already gone on from our 2 sister cities either side, and to replicate that very quickly. And then, of course, have our own path after that, our own Milton Keynes path on it. And of course, because we're the AI and data organization, we'll, of course, be looking to bring much more of that in as well. AI is an incredible area, as everybody knows, to be applied to climate solutions. So in MK, there's, according to LinkedIn, there is over 1,000 companies in this space. And of course, many more who touch into this space who want to be greener. And we're looking to serve both this core group of low carbon environmental goods and services companies and also the wider group to leverage from them and to find their own ways to reduce their environmental impact. Such things as making your business greener, SME elevator pitch events, meet the buyer events, special interest group events, and access to finance events. That's just to get us started. So this will bring in more opportunities into Milton Keynes and the immediate surrounding area. It'll allow corporations hopefully to leverage more of the SME innovation in Milton Keynes, particularly in green tech. And hopefully attract more economic investment, more jobs and so on into this particular sector, which, as we know, is just growing and growing so quickly. That's me. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'll stop sharing.
Richard, that was brilliant. And I'm so pleased you picked up the theme of how to connect businesses together. That's very exciting to hear about the MK Green Tech proposal. And after the next presentation, I'll ask Hilary to talk about the relationship between the way that sustainable businesses and the general business community can have come together and what Semlep can potentially do to help that even further. Before then, I'm going to invite Jane to give her presentation. Over to you, Jane.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I'll try and be as quick as I can in running through this presentation. I'm hoping to talk to you about the Bedford and Milton Keynes Waterway Park, and in particular the role that I think it can help play in underpinning growth in the area. In fact, the way in which green and blue infrastructure can help underpin growth more generally. The project itself involves linking the River Great Ouse in Bedford at Kempston to the Grand Union Canal in Milton Keynes. And also linking on the way 3 lakes at Brogborough, Sturtby and Wilton. Next slide, please. Yeah, thanks. I chair a trust, and I think that just as a bit of background, I think that it's quite significant in relation to what's happening with this project. We're a charity. We've been actively promoting the business case for this project for several years. We're largely self-financed by our own social enterprises. We've been running a boat on the River Great Ouse for several years, and this year we started running an electric community boat on the Grand Union Canal, and that's our main source of income. Next slide, please. Yeah. So by way of strategic context, the other presentations have already pointed at the importance of recognising climate change as a global threat. The government, in recognising that, published its 25-year plan for the environment back in 2018, and that set a number of targets, 2 of which I think are very relevant to waterways and to the new Waterway Park. Clean and plentiful water, and reduced risk of harm from environmental hazards such as flooding and drought. The other targets are also important, but I would flag those 2 up particularly. Next slide, please. So why is water important? Largely because we're not very good at managing it. When we have too much, we don't know what to do with it, and it causes huge harm and large and significant problems. Increasingly, it's becoming evident that in this country, we are going to have to learn to manage water shortages as well. In 2020, the government published its National Framework for Water Resource, and in the introduction to that, Emma Howard-Boyd, the chair of the Environment Agency, made this very telling comment that if we don't take action, many areas of England will face water shortages by 2050, and that's happening already in East Anglia. So water resource plans are being drawn up by 6 regional water resource organisations, and they will feed into a national water resource plan by 2024. Next slide, please. And so why is that important? Why having a waterway, why having a water resource plan? What difference can that make? Well, it can help with flood risk management, improved water supply, by linking between regions, something that we haven't been able to do very effectively up until now, and move water around the country from areas where there's a lot to areas like East Anglia and increasingly London where there is less. And also as part of that, open water transfer, and by that I mean moving water around in pipes, not in pipes, in open water channels, is being seen as having increased benefits all round in terms of it's cost effective. It can encourage people to take more recreation, walking, cycling, going out beside water. It can better link communities and have positive impacts on biodiversity and ecology. So open water transfer, really important. Next slide, please. So why the Bedford and Milton Keynes Waterway Park? Well, at the moment, there is nothing there, and that's what's important. It's a significant link in the UK waterway network. Next slide, please. It was recognised back in the 19th century, but at that point, not having the link was important from a transport perspective when a lot of goods were moved around by waterways. And as the slide shows, by not having that link, it took, and it still takes, a long time to travel from the Grand Union in Milton Keynes by boat all the way around to Bedford, because Bedford became effectively the end of the line. But now why the waterway? Why is it important now? Next slide, please. Well, the trust that I chair and the partners who support us think it can be really critical and bring a lot of benefits for the future. Managing flood risk, open water transfer, and then a range of other benefits that will come out of the connectivity that the waterway can bring, particularly in relation to walking, cycling, and increased biodiversity by linking open spaces and existing parkland. And it can also provide a context for new and sustainable communities. Next slide, please. So there's already quite significant policy support for the waterway. It's supported in 3 local plans. Semlep's strategies support it. It aligns with quite a number of the targets for the 25-year plan for the environment. It also aligns quite very well with the environmental policy for the Oxford to Cambridge Arc, and was referenced in the Oxford to Cambridge Arc Economic Prospectus in 2020. Next slide, please. The trust that I chair is also underpinned with support from a whole range of partners, particularly Semlep and the local authorities in the Environment Agency, and more recently Water Resources East, which is the water resource organisation for the Eastern region, who we've started to work with very closely. Next slide, please. So together with the consortium, this is the vision that we are promoting and that we agreed on in 2016, which we think accurately reflects what we believe the Waterway Park can do for this area. Next slide, please. So I was recently asked, with all this background and with all the benefits that the waterway can bring, with all the support we've got, why has nothing happened yet? I think the fact that I chair a charitable trust is quite significant in relation to that. And just last week, I joined an all-party parliamentary group on waterways that was talking about water transfer and waterways, and about needing to build a national network. Quite significantly, a number of the missing links in that network at the moment, including ours and other waterways that are being restored rather than built from new, are managed by charities and voluntary organisations. That means that we don't have a sponsor government department and we don't have an agency, a single agency that can help us deliver that infrastructure. And that means, I think that could be quite significant in the future. So we've been working on building a business case
for the waterway, and with the aim of trying to get to a point where other agencies and other organisations can take the whole project forward in the future. The trust that I chair, we achieved lottery funding in 2004, and that helped us actually plan the route. Next slide, please. And that route then became locked into local plans. We also funded an economic analysis in 2018. We paid for consultants to fully cost the route, and we also employed the consultants who worked on the business case for the Falkirk Wheel in Scotland to do one for us. And they pointed to significant economic benefits coming from our waterway, particularly around the potential to have a tourist attraction, a bit like the Falkirk Wheel at Brogborough Hill, which some see as a barrier to the waterway, but we see as something that has huge potential. So economic benefits largely from increased tourism in the future. Next slide, please. The private sector is already showing confidence in the Waterway project, and there's a planning application was submitted by O&H Developments to Central Bedfordshire Council in 2019 for a 5,000 home development which will use the waterway as its strategic drainage, as well as a key focus for development, particularly the parkland area, which is in which the waterway will sit. And the waterway there will work as drainage by linking the two lakes at Brogborough and Stewartby. Next slide, please. So how can our waterway park contribute to flood risk management and water resilience? Well, more recently, the Environment Agency and Water Resources East, I'll refer to in a minute, just now have come forward and have started to fund work into looking at how the waterway park might actually work as a strategic water balancing asset. So what they're looking at is, first of all, is there capacity to establish a waterway link? So is there enough water in the catchment to fill a waterway, a navigable waterway, and to allow it to work with and to accommodate water traffic? So the answer to that at the moment is yes. The next thing that the consultants are looking at the moment is there capacity to help with flood management by draining water out of the River Ouse in Bedford and to hold it in Marston Vale and release it more slowly? The answer to that is at the moment is yes, it looks like there is the capacity to take water out of the Ouse in Milton Keynes, hold it in the various, in Wilton, Brogborough, Stewartby lakes and potentially other places, and then release it later on. The big question, which is still waiting to be answered, but is there capacity to actually hold that water through to the summer and release sufficient of it to meet demand that is growing in East Anglia? It's looking positive at the moment, but we don't quite have the answer to that question. And we're hoping that this work will complete by the end of this year. And that could help us take a big step forward, because if we can demonstrate that this waterway is going to work as a big balancing facility, then that can bring huge benefits to the area. Next slide, please. So because this isn't like a road or rail project, because there isn't an immediate approach to building the business plan, this is quite a complex project for us. So maximum potential will only be delivered if the waterway park in its entirety is completed. But delivery, we know, can't be done all at once. It's going to require a phased and layered approach. Governance of something like this is going to be really complex, because it will have to be a hybrid public-private sector scheme and require investment from both sectors. New waterways are very rare. One of these I don't think has been done before, and in particular, we're going to have to answer very complex questions like who's going to own it? Who's going to own the benefits that might stem from it? And is there a market for the benefits that can stem from the waterway, such as offsetting and water transfer? To answer these questions, our next step is going to be to seek funding, revenue funding, to employ expert help to look at an investment plan and look at a pilot project from the Environment Agency's Investment Readiness Fund. So next step. Next slide, thank you. So by using revenue funding from the Investment Readiness Fund, which is what it says it is, it will help get our project nearer to investment. We hope that we'll be able to demonstrate that this project can be a crucial part of growth in the area by helping to meet targets set by the government's 25-year plan for the environment, but also to help locally to provide clean and plentiful water, to support wildlife, to reduce harm from flooding and from drought, and just generally to make better use of resources locally and improve our natural environment. Next slide. So far from just being a waterway with boats on, we certainly hope that we can prove the case that the Bedford and Milton Keynes Waterway Park will be essential infrastructure for growth. It can be part of a national waterway network, and it can be part of a green recovery. I'll stop there.
Jane, thank you very much. Fascinating for anyone who already knows about it or someone who's new to it, and great to hear that update. I'm just going to very quickly pick up some of the questions that have been asked in the chat. We may go 1 or 2 minutes past 1 o'clock, but of course, if people need to leave us, totally understand. Just want to make sure we pick up some of the points that people have been making. And Hilary, the question of how businesses focused on sustainability network together, but then also how they work with the generality of businesses. It's come up a couple of times. If you could just touch on what we're already doing and what Semlep might do more to facilitate that.
Thanks very much, Peter. And this is very much part of what our Growth Hub does. You know, we have business advisors talking to businesses on a daily basis. We establish webinars and opportunities for transferring that knowledge and experience and information. And absolutely, it's been great to see so many people interested in continuing to do that networking and enable that transfer of practice. I mean, I do feel that we're really at a stage when we've got to be able to provide some practical examples. And I thought the presentation today from Ian was really inspiring, and all the comments from Kathleen in the chat. So I will take away as an action to talk to Vicky and the Growth Hub about how we can continue to ensure that we network effectively and link up businesses in the area and provide that way forwards. Because, as I commented, our business survey at the moment shows that a lot of our businesses are not thinking sufficiently about the challenges ahead, and that's where we can help.
Thanks, Hilary. And then more of a policy question from Stuart. He said a lot of good groundwork has been covered, but what's the next step on integrating the natural and built environment?
That is an excellent question, Stuart. And as you know, with the Oxford to Cambridge ARC, you know, the government's looking at the possibility of an ARC spatial framework. And at the moment they're looking at the consultation responses, but integration of planning, both transport, built environment and the natural environment is really what the ARC collaboration has brought to the fore. So the ARC environment principles that hopefully you will all have seen, or we can provide links to that, the infrastructure principles and the work that has been carried out across our local nature partnerships and the fantastic mapping of the local environment. That's all a starting point. But to take that forward, you're absolutely right to raise it as an issue, Stuart. We need to ensure that our local planning authorities are fully integrated into that overall picture, and organisations such as Water Resources East that Jane mentioned, and the work that they're doing around looking at the need for additional capacity, both water, electricity and such like. We've started the process. There's a lot of collaboration, a lot of people talking, but you're absolutely right. We need to turn that into actions. And I think that's what we're talking today about, the decade ahead, and that's really our challenge for the next decade.
Thanks, Hilary. And I think that definitely fits with the changing definition of the Oxford-Cambridge arc as being much more of a kind of locally led bottom up partnership, as opposed to something that's being imposed by central government with targets and so on, and how that public-private collaboration and the collaboration between local authorities works is going to be a key aspect of that. And a question that relates to that from Councillor Jim Hakewell: how could Semlep identify land in public ownership which could potentially be used to plant trees?
Thanks very much, Jim, and so pleased that you could join us today as one of the people that has been with Semlep right from the beginning, and previously the Milton Keynes South Midlands growth area. You may already be aware that around the Marston Vale area, which actually is a lot of the area that Jane's been showing us around the Waterway map, there's a community forest. The ARC Environment Group has had some really interesting work presented, that community forest, which has identified the potential for planting more trees. I think they have a target to have something like 30% of the community forest area planted with trees. There's also some excellent work in Northamptonshire that Jim Roquette has been carrying out on behalf of the Northamptonshire Local Nature Partnership. So I'm very happy to follow up with you and put you in touch with those organisations. So it's not so much Semlep identifying, but again, a really good example of how Semlep can convene and bring together those organisations and hopefully start to make a difference.
Thank you, Hilary. And I'll just quickly pick up a couple of points that have been made in the chat and the Q&A. There was a question about specific projects based in Luton. We haven't alluded to any in these particular slides, but there have been a number, and particularly around developing the kind of creative sector, the hat factory area in Semlep. And I remember going a couple of years ago to an absolutely memorable opening event for that, the hat factory arts facility, and some of the other building dedicated to media and creative industries there. A question about funding for the Green Arc and funding at the Arc level. It's true that there wasn't anything specifically announced in the recent budget, but there is still the potential, and the development of the Oxford-Cambridge Arc is something which we're closely involved in, and I'm sure more will be heard about that in the new year. I think that covers most of the questions that have been asked. We're always available, of course, to answer things offline. If there are things that you want to follow up, do get in contact with Hilary and her team, and we'll try and help you. To thank everyone for attending again. Many of you are people who've been involved in that 10-year journey for Semlep, so your support and continued involvement is hugely appreciated. Thank you, Hilary and the team, for preparing an excellent event. And we look forward to seeing you all in person as soon as possible. Thanks very much indeed, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming today, and hope to see you all soon. Goodbye.